In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, a priceless ancient amulet vanishes from a locked museum case during a private tour, plunging the town into a web of suspicion. Was it the nervous curator, clutching his key? The theatrical guide, lingering by a curtain? The scholarly historian, obsessed with ancient runes? Or the glamorous widow, hiding secrets behind her charm? As whispers of a black market deal swirl, only Miss Jane Marple, with her keen eye and quiet wisdom, can unravel the truth. In a game of shadows and deceit, where a flicker of light hides a thief's hand, she sets a cunning trap to catch a culprit, revealing that even the most learned heart can fall to greed. Chapter 1. The Vanishing Treasure. The late summer sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of St. Mary Mead, a village so unassuming that its scandals rarely rippled beyond the vicarage tea table. Yet, on this particular August evening, a tremor of excitement stirred the air, for the modest St. Mary Mead Museum, housed in the old manor house on Willow Lane, had opened its doors for a rare private tour. The occasion was the unveiling of an ancient amulet, a jade disc no larger than a teacup saucer, its surface etched with runes that whispered of forgotten civilizations. Scholars speculated it held mystical powers, though Miss Jane Marple, seated in her rose-covered cottage, suspected its true allure lay in human greed rather than magic. Miss Marple, her nimble fingers guiding wool through her knitting needles, learned of the event from her nephew, Raymond West, who had stopped by that afternoon. Raymond, a writer with a romantic penchant for antiquities, mentioned the tour in passing, his voice tinged with curiosity. "They say the amulet's priceless, Aunt Jane," he remarked, adjusting his scarf with a flourish. "Only a few were invited, quite exclusive." Miss Marple smiled faintly, her pale blue eyes gleaming behind her spectacles. Exclusivity, she knew, often bred mischief. By dusk, the news had darkened. Raymond returned, his usual nonchalance replaced by agitation. "It's gone, Aunt Jane!" "The amulet, stolen, right under their noses." Over a pot of Darjeeling, he recounted the tale as it had reached him. During the tour, as the small group gathered around the amulet's display, the lights in the museum's exhibition room had flickered briefly. When they steadied, the case stood empty, its lock untouched, the jade disc vanished. The police, led by Inspector Craddock, were already at the scene, but the village buzzed with speculation. Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her mind already threading through the possibilities. She recalled a long-ago incident at a village bazaar, where a silver spoon had disappeared during a momentary distraction. "Who was there, Raymond?" she asked, her voice soft but precise. He listed the suspects. Mr. Hargreaves, the museum's fastidious curator. Miss Langley, the young guide with a flair for dramatics. Dr. Penrose, a visiting historian with a passion for ancient relics. And Mrs. Whitby, a wealthy widow known for her ostentatious hats. "Just the four of them, and no one else in the room," Raymond said. "Craddock's at his wit's end." Later that evening, Inspector Craddock himself appeared at Miss Marple's door, his face lined with the strain of a case that promised no easy answers. Over a second pot of tea, he shared the details. The museum's exhibition room, a high-ceilinged chamber with oak-panelled walls, had a single entrance and no windows. The amulet had rested in a glass case, secured by a lock that Mr. Hargreaves swore he had checked moments before the theft. The group had been admiring the artifact when the lights faltered for perhaps 10 seconds. No one left, no one entered, Craddock said, rubbing his temples. It's as if the thing dissolved into thin air. Miss Marple's needles clicked rhythmically, her thoughts elsewhere. She pictured the scene, the dim room, the group's faces lit by the glow of the display, the sudden darkness. 10 seconds, she murmured, is quite enough time for a clever hand. She thought of Mrs. Bantry's cook years ago, who had slipped a ring from a guest's purse during a power cut at a dinner party. Darkness, she knew, was a thief's best ally. Craddock mentioned the amulet's reputed value, not merely academic, but a lure for collectors with shadowy connections. The black market, Miss Marple suggested, her tone mild. Craddock nodded grimly. We're checking their backgrounds, but it's a small group, and they all seem respectable. Miss Marple's lips twitched. Respectability, in her experience, was often a mask. She recalled a village doctor, upright by day, who had pilfered from the poor box by night. "Will you come to the museum tomorrow, Miss Marple?" Craddock asked, half hoping, half resigned. "You've a way of seeing things we miss." She agreed, her mind already sketching the characters. The nervous curator, the theatrical guide, the erudite historian, the flamboyant widow. "People," she said as Craddock rose to leave, "are rather like my knitting patterns. They look simple, but there's always a twist you don't expect." As the door closed behind him, Miss Marple gazed out at the moonlit garden, her thoughts weaving through the mystery. The amulet was gone, but its absence told a story, one she intended to unravel. Chapter 2. The Museum's Secrets. The morning after the theft, St. Mary Mead woke to a sky heavy with clouds, as if the village itself sensed the weight of the mystery at its heart. Miss Jane Marple, her umbrella in one hand and a basket of knitting in the other, made her way along Willow Lane toward the St. Mary Mead Museum. The air carried the damp scent of approaching rain, and the cobbled path, slick with dew, demanded careful steps. Miss Marple, though frail in appearance, moved with the quiet determination of one accustomed to observing life's subtler currents. Her pale blue eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, missed nothing, not the sparrow darting from a hedge, nor the flicker of curtains in a nearby cottage, where Mrs. Price, the village's most avid gossip, was surely watching. The museum, a converted manor house, stood at the lane's end, its ivy-clad walls lending an air of faded grandeur. Once the home of a minor baronet, it now housed relics of local and distant pasts, from Roman coins to chipped teacups donated by villagers. The amulet, however, had been its crown jewel, a rarity that had drawn the attention of scholars and, evidently, a thief. Miss Marple paused at the iron gate, noting the uneven gravel path leading to the entrance. A thief, she mused, would need to know the building well, or have a keen eye for opportunity. Inside, the museum was a labyrinth of dim corridors and creaking floorboards, its air thick with the musty scent of old wood and polished brass. Inspector Craddock met her at the door, his face etched with the strain of a sleepless night. "You're a saint for coming, Miss Marple," he said, leading her toward the exhibition room. "We've found nothing. No fingerprints, no forced locks. It's as if the amulet walked off on its own." Miss Marple's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Objects," she said, "rarely move without human assistance." The exhibition room was a grand space, its high ceiling adorned with faded plasterwork, its walls lined with oak panels that gleamed dully in the morning light. Glass cases stood in orderly rows, displaying artifacts of varying significance. A bronze dagger, a collection of pottery shards, a faded tapestry. At the room's centre, cordoned off by a velvet rope, stood the empty case that had held the amulet. It was a sturdy thing, made of thick glass and reinforced with a brass frame, its lock gleaming under the chandelier's muted glow. Miss Marple approached it slowly, her umbrella tapping the floor as she studied the scene. "No signs of tampering," Craddock said, gesturing to the lock. "Hargreaves insists he locked it after showing the amulet to the group." "The key was in his pocket the whole time," Miss Marple nodded, her eyes tracing the case's edges. She recalled a village fete years ago, where a locked box of raffle prizes had been emptied by a clever hand using a hairpin. Locks, she knew, were only as secure as the people who guarded them. She stepped back, taking in the room's layout. A single oak door, heavy and banded with iron, served as the only entrance and exit. There were no windows, a peculiarity for a manor house, though Miss Marple supposed the room had once been a library or study, designed for privacy. A heavy velvet curtain, deep green and slightly frayed, hung along one wall, partially obscuring a display of medieval tools. She approached it, running her fingers lightly over the fabric. "This curtain," she said almost to herself, "is rather close to the case, isn't it?" Craddock frowned. Miss Langley said she was adjusting it when the lights went out. Said it had caught on something. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "How convenient," she murmured, picturing a young seamstress from St. Mary Mead who had once hidden stolen lace behind a curtain during a church bazaar. She turned to Craddock. "And the lights? Any word on what caused the flicker?" "Not yet," he admitted. "The caretaker, old Tompkins, swears the wiring's sound, but we're having it checked." Miss Marple nodded, her mind already weaving a pattern. A flicker of light, a curtain's shadow, a locked case. Each was a thread in a tapestry of deception. She asked to see the rest of the museum, sensing that the building itself might hold clues to the thief's method. Craddock led her through a warren of corridors, past cases of yellowed manuscripts and tarnished coins. The museum was larger than it appeared from the outside, its layout a maze of small rooms and narrow passages. Miss Marple noted the creaking floorboards, the uneven steps, the faint draught from a poorly sealed door. "A place full of secrets," she said softly, recalling a vicarage attic where a stolen necklace had been hidden in plain sight. She paused at a side door leading to the basement, its paint chipped and its hinges rusted. "Where does this go?" she asked. "To the furnace room and storage," Craddock said. "We checked it. No sign of anyone hiding there." Miss Marple nodded, but her thoughts lingered on the door. A basement, she knew, could be more than a storage space. It could be a thief's refuge, or a route to escape. They returned to the exhibition room, where Mr. Hargreaves, the curator, awaited them. He was a small man, nearing 60, with thinning hair and a habit of adjusting his spectacles when nervous. His hands, Miss Marple noted, were never still, fidgeting with a pen or smoothing his tweed jacket. "This is a disaster," he said, his voice high with distress. "The amulet was entrusted to us by the Historical Society. If it's not recovered, our reputation will be ruined." Miss Marple regarded him with her gentle, probing gaze. "Tell me, Mr. Hargreaves, about the tour. Who arranged it? He explained that Dr. Penrose, the historian, had requested a private viewing for himself and a few others, citing academic interest. The museum, always eager for scholarly attention, had agreed. It was a small group, Hargreaves said, just Doctor. Penrose, Miss Langley, Mrs. Whitby, and myself. We are all in this room when it happened. And the amulet, Miss Marple said. You showed it to them. Hargreaves nodded vigorously. I unlocked the case to point out the runes. They were all quite taken with it, especially Doctor. Penrose. He said it was a find of unparalleled significance. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. Enthusiasm, she knew, could mask darker intentions, as it had with a village choirmaster who coveted a silver chalice. She asked to examine the case more closely. Craddock handed her a pair of gloves, and she peered at the lock, a modern contraption with a small, intricate keyhole. No scratches, she murmured. No signs of force. She stepped back, her mind turning to a long-ago incident involving a locked desk and a paperclip wielded by a cunning housemaid. A lock, she said to Craddock, is only as good as the moment it's left unwatched. Hargreaves, hovering nearby, seemed to take her words as an accusation. I never left the key unattended, he protested, his spectacles slipping down his nose. It was in my pocket, and I locked the case before we moved on to the next display. Miss Marple smiled reassuringly, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Pockets, she knew, were not impregnable. A quick hand could lift a key as easily as a pickpocket lifted a purse. She turned her attention to the velvet curtain, pulling it aside to reveal the wall behind. The display of medieval tools, a rusted scythe, a chipped axe, seemed unremarkable, but she noted a small gap between the wall and the floor, barely wide enough for a coin. Kneeling carefully, her joints protesting, she peered into the gap. Nothing but dust and a faint draught. Yet the curtain's position, so near the case, lingered in her mind. A stage for deception, she said softly, rising with Craddock's assistance. They moved to the museum's small office, where Hargreaves offered her a chair and a cup of weak tea. The room was cluttered with papers, old ledgers, and a dusty typewriter, a testament to the museum's modest budget. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes scanning the shelves. A photograph caught her attention. A younger Hargreaves standing beside a man in academic robes, both smiling proudly. That's Doctor. Penrose, Hargreaves said, following her gaze. We met years ago at a conference. He's been a great supporter of our work here. Miss Marple nodded, filing the connection away. She asked about the other suspects. Miss Langley, Hargreaves said, was a local girl, hired for her enthusiasm and knack for engaging visitors. She's a bit theatrical, he admitted, but reliable. Mrs. Whitby, the visitor, was a newcomer to the area, staying at the vicarage while touring the countryside. She's wealthy, Hargreaves said, and fond of collecting oddities, but I can't imagine her stealing. Miss Marple's lips twitched. Wealth, she knew, often fueled acquisitiveness, as she'd seen with a village matron who hoarded stolen trinkets. As they spoke, Miss Langley herself appeared, her auburn hair pinned neatly, her smile bright but strained. "Miss Marple, what a pleasure," she said, her voice carrying the cadence of a stage actress. "I do hope you can help us." "This theft is simply dreadful." She recounted her version of the evenings at Kate. Group's fascination with the amulet, her role in guiding them through the exhibits, the sudden darkness. "I was by the curtain," she said, "trying to fix it. It had caught on a display." Miss Marple's eyes lingered on her, noting the quick glance toward Hargreaves, the slight flush in her cheeks. A nervous girl, she thought, or one with something to hide. Craddock, growing restless, suggested they inspect the fuse box, mentioned by the caretaker as a possible cause of the light's flicker. They descended to the basement, a damp, shadowy space with exposed pipes and stacks of crates. The fuse box, an ancient contraption of wires and switches, was tucked in a corner. Miss Marple, holding her umbrella like a pointer, noted a loosened panel, its screws slightly askew. "Tampered with, perhaps," she said, her tone mild. Craddock frowned, promising to have it examined. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to a village electrician who had once rigged a light to fail, distracting guests while he pilfered their belongings. Back in the exhibition room, Miss Marple stood alone for a moment, letting the silence settle. The empty case gleamed mockingly, its glass reflecting the chandelier's light. She pictured the scene: Hargreaves unlocking the case, Penrose's eager gaze, Langley's theatrical gestures, Whitby's gloved hands. 10 seconds of darkness, she thought, was a lifetime for a thief. She recalled a parlour game from her youth, where a hidden object was found by the cleverest player. This, she knew, was no game, but the principle was the same. The answer lay in what was overlooked. As she left the museum, the first raindrops fell, pattering against her umbrella. Craddock walked her to the gate, his expression a mix of hope and frustration. "Any thoughts, Miss Marple?" he asked. She smiled, her eyes distant. "Only that people are like houses, Inspector. They have their public rooms, all neat and tidy, but it's in the hidden corners, the basements, the attics, where the truth lies." She turned toward home, her mind already sifting through the morning's observations, each a clue in the intricate puzzle of the stolen amulet. Chapter 3. The Curator's Burden, the Rain That Had Threatened Saint. Mary Mead all morning began to fall in earnest as Miss Jane Marple sat in her cottage, her knitting needles clicking softly in rhythm with the patter against the windows. The museum's mystery occupied her thoughts, its threads as tangled as the skein of wool in her lap. She had promised Inspector Craddock to meet Mr. Hargreaves, the curator, at his office that afternoon, and as she donned her sensible coat and hat, she felt the familiar stir of curiosity. People, she knew, revealed themselves in their habits, and Hargreaves's nervous demeanour at the museum hinted at a man under pressure. Whether from guilt or fear, she meant to discover. The museum's office was a small, cluttered room at the back of the building, reached by a narrow corridor lined with faded photographs of past exhibitions. Miss Marple tapped her umbrella lightly on the floor as she entered. Noting the chaos of papers strewn across a mahogany desk, the shelves sagging under the weight of dusty tomes, and a single flickering lamp casting shadows on the walls, Mr. Hargreaves rose to greet her, his spectacles slipping down his nose as he adjusted them with a trembling hand. "Miss Marple, how kind of you to come," he said, his voice strained. "This business with the amulet, it's a nightmare." She settled into a worn chair, her basket of knitting at her feet, and accepted a cup of tea from a chipped pot. The tea was lukewarm, a detail that reminded her of a village schoolteacher who served tepid drinks when distracted by guilt. "Tell me, Mr. Hargreaves," she began, her tone gentle but probing. About the evening of the theft. Every detail, if you please. He hesitated, then launched into his account, his words precise but delivered with an edge of desperation. He had planned the private tour meticulously, he said, Doctor. Penrose's request. The group, Penrose, Miss Langley, Mrs. Whitby, and himself, had gathered in the exhibition room at 7 o'clock. The amulet, displayed in its glass case, was the highlight. I unlocked it briefly, he said, to show them the runes up close. Everyone was fascinated, especially Doctor. Penrose, I locked it again immediately, checked it twice, I swear. His fingers twitched toward his spectacles, a gesture Miss Marple noted as a sign of unease, much like a village grocer she once knew, who fidgeted when questioned about missing inventory. And then, she prompted, her eyes never leaving his face. He described the group moving to a nearby display of Saxon coins, his back briefly turned to the case. That's when the lights flickered, he said. Just a moment, no more than 10 seconds. When they came back, I glanced at the case. It looked fine. It wasn't until Mrs. Whitby asked to see the amulet again that I noticed it was gone. His voice cracked, and he buried his face in his hands. 30 years I've worked here, Miss Marple. 30 years, and not a single loss, not even a button. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind sifting through his words. His distress seemed genuine, but she recalled a village librarian who wept convincingly while hiding stolen books. The key, she said softly. You said it was in your pocket. Hargreaves nodded vigorously, pulling a small brass key from his waistcoat. Never left my side, he insisted. She leaned forward, her gaze steady. And you're certain no one could have taken it even for a moment? He flushed, his hands fluttering. I don't see how. I was right there. She let the question hang, turning her attention to the office. A ledger lay open on the desk, its pages filled with neat handwriting detailing donations and loans. She noted an entry for the amulet, marked as a temporary loan from the Historical Society. A valuable piece, she said, almost to herself. Who knew it was here? Hargreaves explained that the tour had been advertised discreetly among academic circles, a doctor. Penrose's suggestion. He said it would draw interest from serious scholars, he added, and perhaps donors. Miss Marple's lips twitched. Scholars, she thought, were as susceptible to temptation as anyone, as she'd learned from a professor who pilfered rare manuscripts from a college library. She asked about the amulet's worth. Priceless to historians, Hargreaves said, but on the black market it could fetch thousands, tens of thousands perhaps. His voice faltered, and he adjusted his spectacles again. Miss Marple watched him closely, recalling a village jeweller who spoke of stolen gems with the same uneasy precision. And the other suspects, she said, did they seem particularly interested? Hargreaves hesitated. Dr. Penrose was engrossed, kept asking about the runes. Miss Langley was her usual self, all flourish and stories. Mrs. Whitby seemed more interested in her reflection in the glass than the amulet itself. He paused, then added, She did ask if it was for sale, but I thought she was joking. Miss Marple's needles clicked as she took this in. A casual question could mask intent, as she'd seen with a village widow who inquired about a neighbour's silver before it vanished. She glanced at the photograph on the shelf, the one showing Hargreaves with Doctor. Penrose, you've known Doctor. Penrose some time, she said, her tone conversational. Hargreaves nodded, a flicker of pride crossing his face. We met at a conference in Oxford years ago. He's published papers on ancient artifacts. Brilliant man." Miss Marple smiled, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Old friendships, she knew, could conceal old debts or shared secrets. She rose, thanking Hargreaves for his time, and asked to see the exhibition room again. He led her back through the corridors, his steps hurried, as if eager to escape her scrutiny. The room was as she'd left it. The empty case a silent accusation under the chandelier's light. She stood by the velvet curtain, picturing the group in the moment of darkness. Hargreaves near the case, Langley by the curtain, Penrose and Whitby close by. 10 seconds, she thought, was a narrow window, but not impossible for a practised hand. She recalled a village magician who made a watch disappear in less time, using only misdirection. "Mr. Hargreaves," she said, turning to him, "you mentioned checking the case after the lights returned. Did you touch the lock?" He frowned, thinking, I don't believe so. I looked at it, saw it was closed, and assumed all was well." Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning to a housemaid who swore a locked drawer was secure, only to find it had been opened with a duplicate key. "And the others," she said, "where were they when the lights came back?" Hargreaves gestured vaguely. Miss Langley was still by the curtain, Doctor. Penrose was examining the coins, and Mrs. Whitby was adjusting her hat. She'd bumped into a display in the dark. Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the curtain, its heavy folds a perfect shield for a quick movement. She thanked Hargreaves and stepped outside, where the rain had softened to a drizzle. As she walked home, her umbrella shielding her from the damp, her thoughts wove through the curator's story. His agitation, his insistence on the key's safety, his long acquaintance with Penrose, all were pieces in a puzzle that refused to align. She pictured Hargreaves's trembling hands, so like those of a village baker caught skimming profits. Guilt, she knew, could wear many masks, but so could fear. Back at her cottage, she settled by the fire, her knitting resuming its steady rhythm. The amulet's theft was no random act, she decided. It required planning, knowledge, and nerve. Hargreaves's role, whether as thief, accomplice, or unwitting pawn, remained unclear, but his burden was evident. "People," she murmured, her needles clicking, "carry their secrets like weights. It's only a matter of time before they stumble." She resolved to speak with Miss Langley next, sensing that the guide's theatrics might hide more than they revealed. Chapter 4. The Guide's Tale. The drizzle had settled into a fine mist by the time Miss Jane Marple made her way back to the St. Mary Mead Museum the following morning. The village was quiet, save for the occasional clatter of a milk cart and the distant bark of a dog, but Miss Marple's mind was far from serene. Her visit with Mr. Hargreaves had left her with a sense of unease, his nervous tics and fervent denials lingering like a discordant note. Now she sought Miss Langley, the young guide whose theatrical flair had caught her attention. People who performed, Miss Marple knew, often used their stagecraft to conceal, as she had once observed in a village actress who hid pilfered sweets behind a dazzling smile. The museum's heavy oak door creaked as she entered, her umbrella dripping softly onto the stone floor. Miss Langley was waiting in the entrance hall, her auburn hair pinned in a neat bun, her green eyes bright with a practised warmth. "Miss Marple, how delightful!" she exclaimed, her voice carrying the lilt of someone accustomed to addressing crowds. "I do hope you're here to unravel this dreadful business with the amulet." Miss Marple smiled, her expression mild, but her gaze sharp, noting the slight quiver in the girl's hands as she gestured toward the exhibition room. "I thought we might walk through the tour's path," Miss Marple said, "just as you led it that evening." Miss Langley nodded eagerly, leading the way with a bounce in her step that seemed almost too lively for the occasion. The corridors, dim and lined with faded portraits, echoed with their footsteps as Miss Langley began her narrative. "I've only been guiding here a few months," she said, "but I love bringing the past to life." The tour was such a thrill. Dr. Penrose was so knowledgeable, and Mrs. Whitby, well, she's quite the character. Her laughter rang out, a touch too loud, reminding Miss Marple of a village girl who giggled nervously when questioned about a missing pie. They reached the exhibition room, its empty case still cordoned off like a silent witness. Miss Langley launched into her account of the evening, her hands fluttering as she described the group's arrival. Mr. Hargreaves started with a little speech about the museum's history. Then we gathered around the amulet. He unlocked the case to show the runes. Oh, they were mesmerizing. Dr. Penrose could hardly take his eyes off them. She paused, her gaze flickering to the case, and Miss Marple noted the brief tightening of her lips, much like a parlour-maid she once knew who faltered when recounting a fabricated alibi. "And where were you standing, my dear?" Miss Marple asked, her tone as gentle as a grandmother's. Miss Langley pointed to the velvet curtain along the wall, its green folds catching the light. "Right here," she said. "I was adjusting it. It had snagged on one of the displays, you see, and it looked untidy." She demonstrated, tugging at the curtain with a flourish, her movements almost too deliberate. Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the spot, recalling a seamstress who used a similar excuse to linger near a jewellery box during a village tea. She stepped closer to the curtain, her umbrella tapping the floor as she examined the display behind. A collection of iron tools, their edges dulled by time. "This display?" she asked, her voice casual. Miss Langley nodded, her smile unwavering but her fingers twisting a stray lock of hair. "Yes, just a bit of a tangle. I fixed it quickly, but then the lights went out, and we were all in a muddle." Miss Marple nodded, picturing the scene. The group clustered around the case, the sudden darkness Langley's hands busy at the curtain. 10 seconds, she thought, was time enough for a clever move, as she'd seen with a village conjurer who slipped a coin from a mark's pocket during a blackout. "Tell me," Miss Marple said, turning to face the girl, "what did you do when the lights went out?" Miss Langley's smile faltered just for a moment. "Oh, I just stood here, trying not to bump into anything. It was so dark, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face." Her laugh was bright, but Miss Marple caught the slight tremor in it, reminiscent of a young governess who laughed off questions about a missing brooch. "And when the lights returned," Miss Marple pressed. "I was still here," Miss Langley said quickly. Dr. Penrose was by the coins, Mr. Hargreaves was near the case, and Mrs. Whitby was fussing with her hat. She'd knocked it askew in the dark. Miss Marple's needles, tucked in her basket, seemed to call to her, their rhythm a counterpoint to her thoughts. She asked Miss Langley to walk her through the rest of the tour's route, observing the girl's animated gestures as she described the Saxon coins, the medieval tapestry, the Roman pottery. Her enthusiasm was infectious, but Miss Marple sensed a performance, as if the girl were playing a part, They paused at a case of ancient jewellery, and Miss Langley's eyes lingered on a silver ring, her fingers brushing the glass. "Lovely, isn't it?" she said almost dreamily. Miss Marple nodded, recalling a shop girl who admired stolen trinkets with the same wistful air. They sat in the museum's small tea room, a cramped space with mismatched chairs and a view of the rain-soaked garden. Over a pot of tea, Miss Marple steered the conversation to Miss Langley's background. "You're new to Saint. Mary Mead, aren't you?" she asked, her tone disarming. Miss Langley nodded, explaining she'd come from a nearby town, hoping to make her mark as a guide. "I've always loved stories," she said, her eyes brightening. "History is full of them. Kings and queens, thieves and heroes." Her voice took on a dramatic cadence, and Miss Marple smiled, thinking of a village storyteller who wove tales to distract from her own misdeeds. "And the amulet," Miss Marple said. "Did it inspire any stories?" Miss Langley's face lit up. "Oh, yes. I told the group it was said to bring luck to its wearer, but doom to those who stole it. Just a bit of fun, of course." Her laugh was quick, but Miss Marple's gaze sharpened. Superstitions, she knew, could stir motives, as she'd seen with a villager who stole a cursed locket to sell it for profit. "And the others," she asked, "how did they react?" Miss Langley shrugged. Dr. Penrose said it was nonsense, but he kept studying the runes. Mrs. Whitby laughed and said she'd buy it for the luck, if it were for sale. Mr. Hargreaves just looked nervous. He always does. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind piecing together the girl's words. Langley's position by the curtain, her quick hands, her flair for distraction, all pointed to opportunity. Yet her youth and openness suggested innocence, or perhaps a clever mask. Miss Marple recalled a young actress who played the ingenue while slipping silver spoons into her bag. "You must enjoy your work here," she said, watching the girl closely. Miss Langley beamed. "Oh, I do. It's like being on a stage, bringing the past to life." Her enthusiasm was genuine, but Miss Marple noted the way her eyes darted to the door, as if expecting interruption. As they rose to leave, Miss Marple paused by the exhibition room's entrance, her gaze settling on the chandelier overhead. Its bulbs, modern but housed in an antique frame, flickered slightly, a reminder of the night's events. "The lights," she said, almost to herself. "Such a curious thing." Miss Langley nodded, her smile fading. "It was so sudden," she said. "I thought it was just old wiring." Miss Marple's lips twitched. Wiring, she thought, or a deliberate act as she'd seen with a village prankster who tampered with a lamp to steal a purse. She thanked Miss Langley and stepped into the mist, her umbrella shielding her from the damp. The girl's story was plausible, but its polish raised questions. A curtain, a flicker of light, a moment of chaos. Each could be a prop in a thief's performance. As she walked home, her thoughts turned to Dr. Penrose, whose scholarly passion for the amulet seemed almost too intense. "People," she murmured, her steps steady on the wet cobbles, "hide their truths in the stories they tell." She resolved to seek out the historian next, sensing that his knowledge might hold the key to the amulet's fate. Chapter 5. The Historian's Expertise. The mist had cleared by midday, leaving Saint. Mary Mead bathed in a pale, watery sunlight that did little to warm the chill in Miss Jane Marple's bones. Her morning with Miss Langley had sharpened her curiosity, the young guide's theatrical manner lingering like a half-remembered play. Now her thoughts turned to Dr. Penrose, the visiting historian whose passion for the amulet had been noted by all. Scholars, Miss Marple knew, could be as driven by obsession as any collector. And she recalled a village tutor who hoarded rare books with a zeal that bordered on theft. With her umbrella tucked under her arm and her knitting basket swinging gently, she set off for the Blue Boar Inn, where Dr. Penrose was staying. The inn, a timbered building with a sagging roof, stood at the heart of the village, its windows glowing with the promise of warmth. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of ale and wood smoke, and Miss Marple found Doctor Penrose in a corner of the lounge, hunched over a table strewn with papers and a battered leather notebook. He was a tall man, nearing 50, with a scholarly stoop and a shock of greying hair that fell untidily over his brow. His eyes, sharp and restless, flicked up as she approached, and he rose with a courteous but distracted smile. "Miss Marple, I presume," he said, his voice deep and slightly hoarse. "Inspector Craddock mentioned you might call." She settled into a chair opposite him, her basket at her feet, and declined his offer of tea, preferring to keep her hands free for her knitting. "I've come about the amulet, Doctor." "Penrose," she said, her tone mild but her gaze steady. "You seemed quite taken with it." His face lit up, a spark of enthusiasm breaking through his weary expression. "Taken? My dear lady, it was extraordinary. A jade disc, 3rd century, etched with runes that could rewrite our understanding of early trade routes. Its craftsmanship was unparalleled." He leaned forward, his hands gesturing as if tracing the amulet's outline in the air. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, a soothing counterpoint to his fervour. She recalled a village antiquarian who spoke with similar passion about a stolen cameo, only to be found selling it for profit. "You must have studied it closely," she said, her eyes never leaving his face. "What made it so special?" Dr. Penrose launched into a detailed explanation, describing the runes' intricate patterns, their possible links to a lost script from the Near East. "It's not just an artifact," he said, "but a key to a forgotten world. Whoever stole it has robbed history itself." His indignation seemed genuine, but Miss Marple noted the intensity in his voice, the way his hands clenched briefly on the table. She asked about the evening of the tour, and he recounted it with precision. Arriving at the museum, listening to Hargreaves's introduction, marvelling at the amulet when the case was opened, "I was standing right beside it," he said, trying to decipher the runes. Then the lights went out. Such a shock. When they came back, we were all a bit disoriented, but the case looked untouched. Miss Marple nodded, picturing the scene. Penrose's scholarly focus, Langley's fuss with the curtain, Whitby's hat, Hargreaves's nervous hovering. "And where were you when the lights returned?" she asked. "By the Saxon coins," he said promptly. "I'd stepped over to look at them just before the flicker." His answer was smooth, but Miss Marple's gaze lingered on his briefcase, stuffed with papers and slightly scuffed, as if handled often. She recalled a vicar who hid purloined church funds in a similar bag, its worn exterior masking its secrets. "You must travel a great deal for your work," she said, her tone conversational. He nodded, a touch of pride in his voice. "Conferences, digs, archives, my research takes me far afield." This amulet was a rare find, worth crossing counties for. She steered the conversation to the amulet's value, feigning ignorance. "Is it the sort of thing people might steal?" she asked, her eyes wide with innocent curiosity. Dr. Penrose's expression darkened. "Oh, certainly," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Collectors, unscrupulous ones, would pay a fortune. The black market thrives on such rarities." His words were measured, but Miss Marple caught a fleeting gleam in his eyes, like that of a village merchant who spoke too knowingly of stolen goods. "And you've seen such markets?" she pressed gently. He hesitated, then shrugged. "One hears things in academic circles, dealers' auctions, private sales. It's a shadowy world." Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind turning over his words. Knowledge of the black market was no crime, but his casual mention of it intrigued her. She recalled a young curate who spoke airily of contacts before being caught fencing stolen candlesticks. "You must have been disappointed," she said, "to see such a treasure vanish." Dr. Penrose's jaw tightened. "Disappointed? I was furious. Years of study, and to have it snatched away." He stopped as if catching himself and forced a smile. "But I'm sure the police will recover it." They moved to the inn's small library where Dr. Penrose had been working. The room was cramped, its shelves lined with faded novels and outdated journals, but he seemed at ease, spreading his paper across a table. Miss Marple glanced at them, noting sketches of runes that matched the amulet's description. "You've drawn these from memory?" she asked, her tone admiring. He nodded, pointing to a particular symbol, a spiral with a jagged edge. "This one's unique," he said. "I've only seen it in one other text, a manuscript in Berlin." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, though her smile remained gentle. The museum's records she recalled from Hargreaves's office made no mention of that spiral. Only someone who had studied the amulet closely, perhaps too closely, could know it. She asked about his connection to Hargreaves, and he spoke warmly of their long acquaintance, begun at a conference in Oxford. "He's a good man, if a bit fussy," Penrose said. "This theft has hit him hard." Miss Marple nodded, thinking of Hargreaves's trembling hands, and wondered if Penrose's fondness masked a deeper leverage. She recalled a village doctor who used old friendships to borrow money he never repaid. "And the others on the tour?" she asked. "Miss Langley seemed very lively." Penrose chuckled. "Oh, she's a performer, always spinning tales to keep the group entertained." Mrs. Whitby, though, she was more interested in her own reflection than the artifacts. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm as she steered the conversation to the museum's layout. "Such an old building," she said. "It must have its quirks." Penrose agreed, mentioning the creaking floors and the basement's damp chill. "I noticed a side door near the exhibition room," he said almost absently. "Probably for storage." Miss Marple's gaze flickered, recalling the chipped door to the basement she'd seen with Craddock. A scholar's eye for detail, she thought, or a thief's reconnaissance. As they parted, Dr. Penrose thanked her for her interest, his manner courteous but guarded. Miss Marple stepped into the village square, the sunlight now breaking through the clouds. Her mind sifted through the historian's words, his passion, his knowledge of the black market, his precise memory of the amulet's runes. Each was a clue, like the scattered pieces of a village jigsaw puzzle she'd once solved, revealing a thief among trusted friends. "Knowledge," she murmured, her umbrella tapping the cobbles, "is a powerful thing, but it can lead a man astray." She resolved to speak with Mrs. Whitby next, sensing that the widow's flamboyance might conceal a different kind of cunning. Chapter 6. The Visitor's Charm. The afternoon sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, casting a golden glow across the village green, as Miss Jane Marple made her way to the vicarage. Her encounter with Dr. Penrose had left her with a sense of unease. His scholarly fervour and unguarded mention of a unique rune lingering in her mind like an unresolved chord. Now, she turned her attention to Mrs. Whitby, the wealthy widow whose presence on the museum tour had been marked by flamboyance. Miss Marple knew that charm, like the polished silver of a village tea set, could conceal tarnish beneath. And she recalled a society lady who smiled sweetly while pocketing a neighbour's pearls. The vicarage, a rambling house with roses climbing its walls, stood at the edge of the village, its garden a riot of late summer blooms. Mrs. Whitby was staying as a guest of the vicar, Mr. Clement, whose wife had mentioned her visitor's penchant for extravagant hats and sharp wit. Miss Marple was shown into the drawing-room by a flustered maid, who announced her with a hurried curtsy. Mrs. Whitby rose from a chintz-covered sofa, her silk dress rustling, and her hat, a confection of feathers and velvet, tilting slightly as she extended a gloved hand. "Miss Marple, what a pleasure," she said, her voice rich with the cadence of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "I hear you're quite the sleuth in these parts." Miss Marple smiled, settling into an armchair with her knitting basket at her side. Her needles began their familiar rhythm, a soft counterpoint to the widow's vibrant presence. "I'm merely curious, Mrs. Whitby," she said, her tone disarming. "The amulet's theft has upset our little village, and I thought you might share your impressions of that evening." Mrs. Whitby laughed, a sound like tinkling glass, and waved a hand adorned with a sapphire ring. "Oh, it was quite the drama. I only joined the tour for a lark. Antiquities aren't really my passion, but I do love a spectacle." She launched into her account with theatrical flair, describing the museum's dim grandeur and Mr. Hargreaves's nervous pride as he unveiled the amulet. "Such a pretty thing," she said, her eyes gleaming, "all green and mysterious, with those odd little carvings. I was standing right by the case, you know, catching my reflection in the glass." She paused, adjusting her hat with a practiced gesture. Miss Marple noted the movement, recalling a village matron who fiddled with her jewellery when dodging questions about a missing brooch. "And what happened when the lights went out?" Miss Marple asked, her gaze steady behind her spectacles. Mrs. Whitby's smile faltered, just for a moment, before she recovered with a shrug. "Oh, it was chaos. Pitch black, and I bumped into a display, nearly lost my hat. When the lights came back, I was still by the case, trying to set myself to rights." Her tone was breezy, but Miss Marple caught the quick glance toward the window, as if the widow were measuring her words. She thought of a young heiress who used charm to deflect suspicion after pilfering a silver spoon at a garden party. Miss Marple's needles clicked as she steered the conversation to the other suspects. "Dr. Penrose seemed quite taken with the amulet," she said, her voice mild. Mrs. Whitby's lips curved into a knowing smile. "Oh, that man was positively obsessed. Kept muttering about runes and ancient secrets. I thought he'd climb into the case with it." Her laugh was sharp, but Miss Marple noted a hint of disdain, as if the widow found the historian's passion faintly ridiculous. And Miss Langley, Miss Marple prompted. Mrs. Whitby waved a hand. A sweet girl, but all theatrics. She was prancing about, telling stories about curses and kings. Quite entertaining, if you like that sort of thing. And Mr. Hargreaves? Miss Marple asked, her eyes never leaving the widow's face. Mrs. Whitby's expression softened, almost pityingly. Poor man, he was a bundle of nerves. Kept fussing with his spectacles and checking that lock. I felt rather sorry for him. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts drifting to a village shopkeeper who feigned sympathy while hiding stolen goods. Mrs. Whitby's compassion seemed genuine, but her polished demeanour suggested a woman skilled at shaping perceptions. They moved to the vicarage garden, where Mrs. Whitby insisted on showing Miss Marple the roses. The air was heavy with the scent of blooms, and the widow's hat bobbed as she pointed out a particularly fine hybrid. Miss Marple, her umbrella tapping the gravel path, asked about the amulet's value. Oh, I suppose it's worth a fortune to the right sort, Mrs. Whitby said airily. I did ask Mr. Hargreaves if it was for sale. Joking, of course. I've enough trinkets. Her laugh rang out, but Miss Marple's gaze sharpened, recalling a lady's maid who jested about stealing a necklace before it vanished. You collect such things? Miss Marple asked, her tone innocent. Mrs. Whitby hesitated, then smiled. Oh, bits and bobs from my travels. Nothing so grand as that amulet. I prefer things that sparkle. She gestured to her sapphire ring, and Miss Marple noted its size, reminiscent of a village collector who coveted rare gems. And during the tour, she said, did you notice anything odd, apart from the lights? Mrs. Whitby frowned, as if searching her memory. Not really. Dr. Penrose was scribbling in his notebook, and Miss Langley was fussing with that curtain. I was too busy with my hat to pay much mind. Miss Marple's needles paused as she pictured the scene. The widow by the case, Penrose's notes, Langley's curtain, Hargreaves's lock. Each detail was a thread, but the pattern remained elusive. She asked about the museum itself, and Mrs. Whitby described its creaking. Charm with a tourist's amusement. Such an old pile, she said. I half expected a ghost to pop out of the walls. Miss Marple smiled, thinking of a hidden panel in a village manor where a stolen watch was found. And the other rooms? She asked. Did you explore them? Mrs. Whitby shook her head. Just the exhibition room and the corridor. I'm not one for poking about in dusty corners. As they returned to the drawing room, Miss Marple's gaze fell on Mrs. Whitby's handbag, a sleek leather affair resting on a side table. It was slightly open, revealing a glimpse of silk and a glint of metal. A brooch, perhaps, or something more significant. She recalled a village guest who hid a stolen pendant in a similar bag, its elegance a perfect disguise. You must travel light, Miss Marple said, nodding toward the handbag. Mrs. Whitby laughed. Oh, I never go anywhere without my essentials. A lady must be prepared. Her tone was playful, but Miss Marple noted the quick movement as she closed the bag. They parted with pleasantries, Mrs. Whitby promising to attend the next village tea. Miss Marple stepped into the fading light, her umbrella shielding her from a fresh drizzle. The widow's charm was undeniable, but its polish raised questions. Her proximity to the case, her casual jest about buying the amulet, her quick recovery from the blackout, all suggested a woman adept at navigating suspicion. Miss Marple thought of a society hostess who deflected questions about a missing bracelet with a dazzling smile. charm," she murmured, her steps slow on the wet path, "is a veil, and veils are meant to be lifted." Back at her cottage, she settled by the fire, her knitting resuming its steady rhythm. Mrs. Whitby's story fit neatly with the others, yet its smoothness was its flaw. The amulet's theft required nerve and opportunity, and the widow had both. But so did Penrose, with his runes, and Langley, with her curtain, and Hargreaves, with his key. Miss Marple's mind wove through the possibilities, each suspect a figure in a village dance, their steps concealing the truth. She resolved to revisit the museum's basement, sensing that its shadows might hold the key to the puzzle. Chapter 7. A Flicker of Truth. The evening closed over St. Mary Mead with a soft grey hush, the drizzle giving way to a damp chill that seeped into the bones. Miss Jane Marple sat by her cottage fire, her knitting needles moving with their familiar soothing rhythm. But her mind was far from restful. The interviews with Hargreaves, Langley, Penrose, and Whitby had woven a tapestry of half-truths and careful performances, each suspect revealing just enough to tantalize without clarifying the puzzle of the stolen amulet. The flickering lights in the museum's exhibition room lingered in her thoughts. A deliberate act, she was certain. As deliberate as the staged fainting spell of a village spinster who once distracted a crowd while her accomplice lifted a purse. Miss Marple's eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, drifted to the window, where the village lay quiet under a veil of mist. She recalled a fete at St. Mary Mead years ago, when a faulty lamp had plunged the hall into darkness, allowing a nimble-fingered youth to snatch a silver tray. The amulet's theft, she mused, required such a moment of chaos, and the lights were the key. She resolved to investigate the museum's wiring herself, or at least to question the caretaker, old Tompkins, whose grumbling about the building's quirks had piqued her interest during her first visit. The next morning, she donned her tweed coat and sturdy shoes, her umbrella a constant companion against the unpredictable September weather. The museum was quiet when she arrived, its oak door creaking as she stepped into the shadowed hall. Inspector Craddock had promised to meet her, but she found Tompkins first, sweeping the corridor with a broom as worn as his expression. He was a stooped man, his face creased like old leather, with eyes that held the weary wisdom of one who had seen the village's secrets unfold over decades. "Morning, Miss Marple," he said, leaning on his broom. "Come to poke about the thievery, I reckon?" She smiled, her manner disarming. "Just a little curiosity, Mr. Tompkins. I understand the lights failed during the tour. Could you show me the fuse box?" He grunted, leading her down the narrow basement stairs, his boots scuffing against the worn stone. The basement was a damp, cavernous space, its air heavy with the scent of mildew and coal dust. Crates of forgotten artifacts lined the walls, and a single bulb cast feeble light on the fuse box, an ancient contraption of wires and rusted switches tucked in a corner. Miss Marple peered at it, her umbrella pointing to the loosened panel she'd noticed before. "This looks tampered with," she said, her tone mild but probing. Tompkins scratched his head, squinting at the screws. "Aye, it's loose, all right. Wiring's old, but it don't fail on its own. Someone's been at it. I'd wager his words confirmed her suspicion." And she thought of a village electrician who had rigged a blackout to cover a theft of church funds. "Who has access to this basement?" she asked. Tompkins shrugged. "Me, Hargreaves, the guides. Anyone who knows the place could slip down here, though. Doors never locked. She thanked him and climbed back to the exhibition room, where Craddock was waiting, his face etched with frustration. "No new leads," he said, running a hand through his hair. "The lock's clean, no fingerprints, and the suspect's stories hold up. Too well, if you ask me." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze drifting to the empty case, its glass gleaming mockingly under the chandelier. "The lights, Inspector," she said. "They're the heart of it." Someone planned that flicker, and the basement tells us how she recounted. Tompkins' observations, and Craddock's eyes narrowed. "I'll have the panel dusted for prints," he said, "but it's been days. Doubt we'll find much." Miss Marple stepped to the velvet curtain, its green folds still and heavy. She pictured Miss Langley standing there, adjusting it during the blackout, and recalled Doctor. Penrose's mention of a side door nearby. Mrs. Whitby's hat, Hargreaves's key, each detail was a piece of the puzzle, but the motive remained elusive. "The amulet," she said, turning to Craddock, "is valuable, yes, but to whom? A collector, a scholar, or someone desperate for money?" Craddock sighed. "We're checking their finances, but Hargreaves is on a curator's salary. Langley's a local girl with no fortune. Penrose lives off grants, and Whitby's richer than half the county. Miss Marple's needles, tucked in her basket, seemed to beckon, their rhythm a mirror to her thoughts. She asked to see the side door Penrose had mentioned, and Craddock led her to it. A chipped, unassuming portal near the exhibition room. It opened to a narrow passage leading to the basement and an exterior door, barely used, that gave onto the museum's overgrown garden. "We checked it," Craddock said. "Locked tight, no signs of forced entry." Miss Marple nodded, but her mind lingered on the passage, a hidden artery in the museum's old bones. She recalled a village manor where a similar door concealed a thief's escape with a stolen candelabrum. Back at her cottage, she spread her knitting across the table, her fingers working as her mind sifted through the clues. The tampered fuse box pointed to premeditation, but who had the knowledge to manipulate it? Hargreaves, with his intimate familiarity with the museum? Langley, whose theatricality could mask cunning? Penrose, whose scholarly eye noted every detail? Or Whitby, whose wealth might hide a craving for rare treasures? Each had been near the case. Each had opportunity in those 10 seconds of darkness. She thought of the curtain, so conveniently snagged, and the key, so fiercely guarded by Hargreaves. Penrose's rune, unknown to the museum's records, suggested a closer inspection than he admitted, while Whitby's jest about buying the amulet hinted at a collector's greed. Miss Marple's needles paused as she recalled a village fete where a blackout hid a theft, orchestrated by a seemingly innocent bystander. "The truth," she murmured, "is in the shadows, where no one thinks to look." She telephoned Craddock, suggesting he question the suspects about their movements before the tour. "Someone visited that basement," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Find out who was in the museum early, or who lingered after hours." Craddock promised to follow up, his tone tinged with renewed hope. Miss Marple returned to her knitting, her thoughts weaving through the suspect's stories. The flicker of light was no accident, and its architect was among them. "People," she said to the empty room, "always leave a trace if you know where to look." She resolved to watch Doctor Penrose more closely, his unguarded knowledge of the amulet's runes a thread she could not yet unravel. Chapter 8. The Historian's Slip, the Village of St. Mary Mead shimmered under a rare burst of September sun, the cobbles glistening from the previous day's rain, as Miss Jane Marple made her way to the village hall. The occasion was a modest gathering, a tea organised by the Women's Institute to raise funds for the church roof. But Miss Marple saw it as an opportunity to observe the suspects together, their interactions unguarded in the social whirl. Her mind, sharp as the needles in her knitting basket, was fixed on Dr. Penrose, whose mention of a unique rune had stirred her suspicions. People, she knew, often betrayed themselves in casual moments, as she had once seen with a village gossip who let slip a thief's name over scones. The hall was a buzz of chatter and clinking teacups, its tables adorned with lace cloths and vases of late roses. Miss Marple settled in a corner, her knitting in her lap, her eyes scanning the crowd. Mr. Hargreaves stood near the refreshment table, adjusting his spectacles as he spoke to the vicar. Miss Langley flitted about, her auburn hair catching the light as she laughed with a group of young women. Mrs. Whitby, her hat a cascade of ostrich feathers, held court near the window, her voice carrying over the hum. Dr. Penrose lingered by a display of local history pamphlets, his tall frame slightly stooped, his expression distant but alert. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her gaze moving from one suspect to another. Hargreaves's nervous gestures, Langley's theatricality, Whitby's charm, all were familiar now, but Penrose's quiet intensity drew her focus. She recalled a village scholar who, under a calm exterior, had hidden a penchant for pilfering rare manuscripts. As she watched, Penrose joined a conversation with a local antiquarian, Mr. Reeves, his voice rising with enthusiasm. "The black market for artifacts is thriving," he said, his words carrying to Miss Marple's corner. "There's a dealer in London, discreet but well known, who'd pay handsomely for something like that amulet." Her needles paused, her ears pricked. The mention of a dealer so casually dropped echoed the boasts of a young man in St. Mary Mead, who bragged of connections before being caught with stolen silver. She rose, her movement slow but deliberate, and approached Penrose, her smile as gentle as a summer breeze. "Dr. Penrose, how fascinating," she said, her tone bright with feigned ignorance. "You know of such dealers? I thought artifacts stayed in museums." He blinked, caught off guard, then recovered with a chuckle. "Oh, one hears rumours in academic circles, Miss Marple. It's a murky world, but I steer clear of it." She nodded, her eyes never leaving his face, noting the slight flush in his cheeks. "Of course," she said, "but you must have studied the amulet closely to know its worth." His expression tightened, but he leaned in, eager to share. "It was a marvel," he said. "The runes, such precision." "There was one, a double spiral with a notched edge, that I've only seen in a rare text from Anatolia." Miss Marple's smile deepened, though her heart quickened. The museum's catalogue, which she'd glimpsed in Hargreaves's office, described no such spiral. Only someone who had handled the amulet, or studied it far beyond the tour's brief viewing, could know such a detail. She steered the conversation to the tour, asking about his impressions of the group. "Miss Langley was quite the showman," he said, a wry smile playing on his lips, "always spinning tales of curses and kings. Mrs. Whitby seemed more interested in her mirror than the artifacts, and poor Hargreaves was a nervous wreck." His tone was light, but Miss Marple caught a hint of disdain, as if he saw himself above the others. She recalled a village tutor who mocked his peers while hiding stolen coins in his desk. "And the lights," she said, her voice soft. "Such an odd moment." Penrose nodded, his eyes narrowing. "A nuisance, but it happens in old buildings." "I was by the coins when it happened. Couldn't see a thing." His answer was smooth, but Miss Marple's mind flashed to the tampered fuse box in the basement. She thought of a village boy who claimed innocence while knowing exactly how a lamp had been rigged to fail. "You must have been disappointed," she said, "to lose such a treasure." Penrose's jaw tightened, his voice low. "More than disappointed, Miss Marple. It's a loss to scholarship." She thanked him and returned to her seat, her knitting resuming its rhythm. The hall buzzed on, but her thoughts were elsewhere, piecing together Penrose's words. His knowledge of the rune, his mention of a dealer, his ease in dismissing the blackout, all pointed to a man with more than academic interest. She recalled a vicar who spoke eloquently of charity while pocketing donations, his eloquence a mask for greed. Penrose's passion for the amulet was undeniable, but passion, she knew, could twist into obsession. As the tea drew to a close, Miss Marple slipped out, her umbrella tapping the cobbles as she walked home. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the village in a soft twilight. She telephoned Inspector Craddock from her cottage, her voice calm but urgent. "Dr. Penrose," she said, "knows more about the amulet than he should. That rune he mentioned, it's not in the museum's records, and his talk of dealers is too precise for mere hearsay." Craddock promised to dig into Penrose's background, his tone tinged with admiration. "You've a knack for this, Miss Marple. I'll check his recent travels, see if he's crossed paths with any unsavoury types." She hung up, settling by the fire with her knitting. The historian's slip, small as it was, had shifted the puzzle's pieces. The fuse box, the curtain, the locked case, all were part of a plan, and Penrose's knowledge placed him at its heart. Yet Hargreaves's nerves, Langley's theatrics, and Whitby's charm could not be dismissed. Miss Marple's needles clicked as she pictured the exhibition room, the moment of darkness, the amulets vanishing. "A slip," she murmured, "is like a dropped stitch. Pull it, and the whole pattern unravels." She resolved to set a trap, one that would draw the thief into the light. Chapter 9. The Trap is Set. The twilight over St. Mary Mead had deepened into a velvet dusk, the village's lights winking like stars against the gathering dark. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cottage, her knitting needles idle for once, her mind a whirl of threads drawn from the suspects' stories. Dr. Penrose's slip about the amulet's unique rune had sharpened her focus, his unguarded knowledge a crack in the facade of scholarly detachment. Yet the others, Hargreaves's nervous tics, Langley's theatrical flourishes, Whitby's polished charm, remained shadows in the puzzle, each capable of exploiting the museum's fleeting darkness. Miss Marple knew that suspicion alone was not enough. The thief must be coaxed into a misstep, as she had once lured a village pilferer by leaving a tempting trinket unwatched. She rose, her movements deliberate despite the ache in her joints, and telephoned Inspector Craddock. The line crackled as she spoke, her voice soft but resolute. "Inspector, we must set a trap. The thief is still among us, and they'll move if they think the amulet is within reach." Craddock, his tone weary but attentive, listened as she outlined her plan. A rumour, carefully planted, that a buyer for the amulet had been spotted in a nearby town, offering a fortune for its safe return. "They'll be watching," she said, "and someone will act, perhaps to sell, perhaps to hide their tracks." Craddock agreed, promising to have his men spread the rumour through the village's gossip channels: Mrs. Price at the post office, the barmaid at the Blue Boar, and to watch the suspects closely. The next morning, Miss Marple visited the village shop, ostensibly for a skein of wool, but knowing Mrs. Price's penchant for spreading news faster than a telegraph. Over the counter she mentioned, with just the right touch of innocence, that a mysterious gentleman had been asking about rare artifacts in Danemouth, hinting at a connection to the stolen amulet. "They say he's offering thousands," she said, her eyes wide behind her spectacles. Mrs. Price's face lit up, and Miss Marple knew the tale would reach every corner of St. Mary Mead by noon. She recalled a village scandal, sparked by a similar whisper, that flushed a thief from hiding when he thought his loot was at risk. Chepdaim afternoon, the rumour had taken root. Miss Marple, sipping tea at the vicarage with Mrs. Clement, overheard whispers of the Danemouth buyer among the guests. Mrs. Whitby, her hat a riot of silk roses, laughed off the gossip, but asked pointed questions about the buyer's identity. Miss Langley, helping serve tea, paused to listen, her hands twisting a napkin. Mr. Hargreaves, passing through to discuss the church roof fund, adjusted his spectacles nervously when the amulet was mentioned. Dr. Penrose, however, was absent, and Miss Marple learned from the vicar's wife that he had left the Blue Boar abruptly, claiming a sudden trip to London for research. Her needles resumed their rhythm as she sat by the vicarage window, her thoughts racing. Penrose's departure was no coincidence, she decided, recalling a village clerk who fled to the city when rumours of his theft surfaced. She telephoned Craddock, her voice calm but urgent. "Dr. Penrose is on the move, Inspector. I suggest you have him followed, Craddock. Already alerted by the inn's barmaid. Confirmed that plainclothes officers were tailing Penrose to a London train station." "We'll see who he meets," he said, "and what he's carrying." Miss Marple returned home, her cottage a haven of quiet amid the village's buzz. She spread her knitting across the table, but her mind was on the trap. The rumour was a baited hook, and Penrose had bitten, but she could not rule out the others. Hargreaves's access to the key, Langley's proximity to the curtain, Whitby's interest in the amulet's value, all were threads in a pattern that refused to fully form. She recalled a village game of cat's cradle, where a single tug revealed the hidden shape. The amulet, she suspected, was still close, perhaps hidden in the museum's maze, or carried by the thief in plain sight. That evening, Craddock called with news. His men had followed Penrose to a discreet meeting at King's Cross Station, where he was seen passing a small parcel to a man known to Scotland Yard as a dealer in antiquities. "We intercepted it," Craddock said, his voice tinged with excitement. "It's a replica, a clever one, but not the real amulet." Miss Marple's lips twitched into a faint smile. "A decoy," she said, "to test the waters. The real amulet is still with him, or hidden where he can reach it." She pictured a village jeweller who sold fake gems to gauge a buyer's interest while keeping the true prize safe. Craddock promised to search Penrose's room at the Blue Boar, and Miss Marple urged him to check the museum's basement again, suspecting a hiding place in its forgotten corners. "People," she said, hide their treasures where they feel safest, and Doctor. Penrose knows that museum better than he lets on. She hung up, her thoughts turning to the historian's briefcase. Its worn leather, a potential vault for secrets. She recalled a village doctor who concealed stolen prescriptions in a similar bag. Its ordinariness, his shield. As the fire crackled in her grate, Miss Marple's needles moved steadily, her mind weaving through the clues. Penrose's rune, his sudden trip, his meeting with the dealer, all pointed to guilt. Yet the replica suggested caution, a mind not yet ready to part with the prize. Hargreaves, Langley, and Whitby remained in the shadows, their roles unclear but not innocent. The trap was set, but the thief's next move would decide the game. Greed, she murmured, her eyes on the flickering flames, is a restless thing. It never stays still for long. She resolved to join Craddock at the museum the next day, certain that the amulet's hiding place was closer than anyone suspected. Chapter 10. The Confession. The morning sun broke through the clouds over Sante. Mary Mead, casting a frail light across the village as Miss Jane Marple made her way to the museum. The trap she had set with Inspector Craddock had borne fruit, but the discovery of Dr. Penrose's replica amulet suggested a cunning mind, one that tested the waters before risking the true prize. Her knitting basket swung gently at her side, her umbrella tapping the cobbles. But her thoughts were sharp, weaving through the threads of the case. Penrose's slip about the rune, his sudden trip to London, and now the decoy parcel. All pointed to him, yet Miss Marple knew that certainty was a trap of its own. She recalled a village swindler who used false clues to mislead, only to be caught by his own overconfidence. The museum was a hive of quiet activity when she arrived, with Craddock's men combing the basement under the caretaker's grudging supervision. Craddock met her at the entrance, his face a mix of triumph and frustration. "We've got Penrose in custody," he said, leading her to Hargreaves's cluttered office. "Caught him at the station with the dealer, but the real amulet wasn't in the parcel. We're searching his room at the Blue Boar now." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes drifting to the photograph of Hargreaves and Penrose on the shelf, their younger selves smiling in academic camaraderie. "He's clever," she said softly, "but clever people often stumble over their own plans." They moved to the exhibition room, where the empty case stood like a silent accusation. Miss Marple paused by the velvet curtain, her mind replaying the night of the theft. Langley's fussing, Whitby's hat, Hargreaves's key, Penrose's keen gaze. The tampered fuse box, she was certain, was Penrose's doing. A scholar's knowledge turned to thievery. She recalled a village mechanic who rigged a machine to fail, covering his theft of tools with a planned breakdown. "Have you searched the basement thoroughly?" she asked Craddock. He nodded. "Top to bottom, but it's a warren. Crates, old displays, hidden nooks. If it's there, it's well hidden." Before they could continue, a constable arrived with news from the Blue Boar. "We found something, sir," he said, holding out a small leather-bound book, its spine cracked and its pages yellowed. It was in Penrose's briefcase, hollowed out. This was inside. He opened it to reveal a glint of green, the jade amulet, its runes catching the light. Miss Marple's lips twitched into a faint smile. "A scholar's hiding place," she murmured, thinking of a village librarian who concealed stolen letters in a hollowed Bible. Craddock's eyes widened. He had it all along, but why the replica? To test the buyer, Miss Marple said, her voice calm but firm. He wanted to know if the deal was safe before risking the real prize. She pictured the exhibition room's darkness, Penrose slipping the amulet into his briefcase, while Langley adjusted the curtain, and Whitby fussed with her hat. 10 seconds, she thought, was enough for a practised hand, as she had seen with a village conjurer who made a watch vanish in a moment's distraction. They brought Dr. Penrose to the museum, his scholarly stoop more pronounced under the weight of custody. His face was pale, his eyes darting, but he held a defiant air as he faced Craddock and Miss Marple in Hargreaves's office. "This is a mistake," he began, but Miss Marple's gentle gaze silenced him. "Dr. Penrose," she said, her tone as soft as a grandmother's, "you knew the amulet's runes too well, details not in any catalogue, and your trip to London, with a replica to tempt a dealer, was a step too far." She held up the hollowed book, the amulet gleaming within. "You hid it cleverly, but not cleverly enough." Penrose's defiance crumbled, his shoulders sagging. "I needed the money," he admitted, his voice low. "Research grants are scarce, and my debts, well, they mounted. The amulet was a chance to clear them, to fund my work." He described how he had studied the museum's layout during earlier visits, noting the basement's access and the fuse box's vulnerability. "I loosened the panel that afternoon," he said, "just enough to cause a flicker. In the dark, I slipped the amulet into my briefcase. It was so quick, no one noticed." Miss Marple nodded, recalling a village clerk who used a similar blackout to steal from a cash box, his plan undone by a single careless boast. "And the others?" Craddock asked. Penrose shook his head. "Hargreaves was too nervous to notice. Langley was caught up in her theatrics, and Whitby was fussing with her hat." They suspected nothing. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Hargreaves's distress, she realized, stemmed from fear of blame, not guilt. Langley's drama was mere habit, and Whitby's charm hid no secrets. The trap had flushed out the true thief, as she had once flushed a village poacher by spreading word of a buyer for stolen game. Craddock took Penrose into custody, the amulet secured for return to its case. As they left the office, Miss Marple lingered, her gaze on the photograph of Penrose and Hargreaves. "Knowledge," she said to Craddock, "is a fine thing, but it tempts as much as it enlightens." She thought of a village teacher who used his learning to forge documents, his brilliance, his downfall. The museum, now quiet, seemed to sigh in relief, its secret lifted from its shadows. As she stepped into the sunlight, her umbrella tapping the path, Miss Marple felt the puzzle resolve, its pieces falling into place. The amulet was safe, the thief unmasked, but the human heart, she knew, would always weave new mysteries. "Greed," she murmured, her knitting basket swinging gently, "is a thread that runs through us all." She resolved to return home, her fire and needles waiting, ready for the next tangle saint Mary Mead might offer. Chapter 11. The Amulet's Return. The sun hung high over Saint Mary Mead, its light filtering through the last wisps of morning mist, as if the village itself exhaled in relief at the resolution of the museum's mystery. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting basket tucked under her arm, walked slowly toward the museum, where the amulet was to be restored to its rightful place. The air carried the crisp scent of autumn, and the cobbles, still damp from the night's dew, gleamed under her sensible shoes. Her mind, though calm, was not idle. The unmasking of Dr. Penrose had tied the threads of the case, but she knew that human nature, like her knitting, often left loose ends that could unravel if unwatched. The museum was a bustle of quiet ceremony when she arrived. Mr. Hargreaves, his spectacles polished to a shine, stood by the exhibition room's entrance, greeting a small crowd of villagers and a representative from the Historical Society. His hands, once trembling, were steady now, though his eyes betrayed a lingering anxiety. Miss Langley, her auburn hair neatly pinned, moved among the guests, her smile bright but subdued, as if the theft had tempered her usual theatrics. Mrs. Whitby, her hat a restrained affair of navy silk, chatted with the vicar, her laughter softer than before. Miss Marple noted their relief, so like that of a village congregation after a scandal had been laid to rest. Inspector Craddock met her at the door, his face alight with the satisfaction of a case closed. "The amulet's back where it belongs," he said, leading her to the glass case, now once again holding the jade disc, its runes catching the chandelier's light. "Penrose is in custody, and the Historical Society is singing our praises." He paused, a wry smile crossing his lips. "Your praises, really, Miss Marple. That trap was a stroke of genius." She waved a hand, her expression modest. "It was merely a matter of listening, Inspector. People always say more than they mean to." They stood by the case, its lock gleaming anew, and Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the amulet. Its green surface, etched with ancient symbols, seemed to pulse with secrets, though she knew its true power lay in the greed it had stirred. She recalled a village heirloom, a silver locket that sparked a feud until its thief was exposed by a careless word. "The others," she said, her voice soft. "They're cleared, I presume?" Craddock nodded. "Hargreaves was beside himself with worry, but he's honest. Langley's all show, no substance, and Whitby, well, her only crime is vanity." Miss Marple's lips twitched into a faint smile. She thought of Hargreaves's nervous tics, now explained by his fear of ruin. Langley's flair, a mask for youthful exuberance, and Whitby's charm, a shield for a collector's curiosity, but not deceit. Each had played their part in the drama, unwitting players in Penrose's scheme. She pictured the historian in the exhibition room, his briefcase ready, the fuse box tampered, the darkness his ally. It was a plan as precise as a village clockmaker's, undone by a single misplaced detail, the rune he should not have known. The ceremony began with Hargreaves delivering a brief speech, his voice steadier now as he thanked the police and certain observant friends for the amulet's recovery. The crowd murmured approval, and Miss Marple, standing quietly at the back, felt the weight of their glances. The village had already begun to weave her into its lore, as it had after a stolen chalice was found through her quiet inquiries. She deflected their praise with a smile, her needles clicking softly in her basket, and slipped out as the guests moved to tea in the museum's tea room. Outside, the sun warmed the cobbles, and Miss Marple paused by the museum's gate, her umbrella resting against her shoulder. Craddock joined her, his hat in hand. "You've done it again, Miss Marple," he said, his tone warm. "How do you spot what we miss?" She looked out at the village, its cottages neat and unassuming, and thought of the countless secrets she had unravelled in their shadows. "It's only watching, my dear Inspector," she said. "People are like gardens. They show their blooms, but the roots are where the truth lies." They parted, Craddock to his reports, Miss Marple to her cottage. As she walked, the village hummed with its usual rhythm, children playing, a cart rattling by, Mrs. Price's voice carrying from the post office. The amulet's return had restored a fragile peace, but Miss Marple knew that St. Mary Mead, like any village, held more mysteries beneath its surface. She thought of a long-ago theft, a silver spoon taken from a vicarage tea, solved by noting a guest's too quick denial. "The world," she murmured, her steps slow but sure, "is never quite as tidy as it seems." At home she settled by the fire, her knitting resuming its steady cadence. The amulet was safe, Penrose's guilt laid bare, but the case left a faint echo in her mind. A reminder of the human frailties that drove even the learned to crime. She pictured the museum's dim corridors, the flicker of light, the hidden book, and smiled. The puzzle was solved, but another would surely come, as inevitable as the next stitch in her pattern, next chapter 12. A quiet reflection. As autumn's first chill settled over St. Mary Mead, the village seemed to draw a collective breath, its rhythm restored after the tumult of the amulet's theft. Miss Jane Marple sat by her cottage fire, the glow casting shadows across her parlour, where a vase of late roses perfumed the air. Her knitting lay folded in its basket, untouched for the moment, as her mind wandered through the now-resolved mystery. The amulet rested once more in its glass case, Doctor. Penrose faced justice, and the museum's honour was salvaged. Yet Miss Marple's thoughts lingered on the frailties that had unravelled so careful a plan. She recalled a village scandal, long ago, when a stolen locket revealed a trusted friend's betrayal, and she knew that human nature was the true enigma, more intricate than any artifact. Outside, the evening deepened, the sky a tapestry of indigo streaked with fading gold. The village was quiet, save for the soft hoot of an owl and the distant clatter of a gate. Miss Marple rose, her joints protesting slightly, and moved to the window, her gaze resting on the familiar outline of St. Mary Mead's cottages. The museum affair had stirred the village like a gust through a still garden, but now the petals had settled, and life resumed its gentle pace. She thought of Dr. Penrose, his scholarly passion twisted by debt into theft, and saw echoes of a village schoolmaster who once forged a signature to cover his losses at cards. Her mind drifted to the other players in the drama. Mr. Hargreaves, whose nervous devotion to the museum masked no crime, only fear of disgrace. Miss Langley, her theatrics a youthful flourish, not deceit, and Mrs. Whitby, whose charm was mere vanity, not guile. Each had been a suspect, their actions magnified by the lens of suspicion, yet they were innocent, as ordinary as the villagers Miss Marple had known who fretted over lost trinkets or misplaced trust. She recalled a parish meeting where a missing collection plate sparked accusations, only for the truth to emerge in a simple oversight. "We see shadows," she murmured, "where there are only people." The amulet itself, with its cryptic runes and whispered legends, held no magic, she decided, only the power to tempt. Its jade surface, cool and ancient, had drawn Penrose's greed as surely as a village heirloom once lured a desperate maid. She thought of the museum's dim exhibition room, the flicker of light, the velvet curtain, and the hollowed book where the amulet lay hidden. Each detail had been a clue, a stitch in the pattern she had unravelled, much like the time she traced a stolen brooch to a seamstress's sewing box by noting a single loose thread. Miss Marple returned to her chair, the fire's warmth easing the chill in her bones. She picked up her knitting, needles clicking softly as she reflected on the trap that had caught Penrose. The rumour of a buyer, spread through Mrs. Price's eager tongue, had been a simple device, yet it worked because greed, like fear, was predictable. She recalled a village poacher, flushed out by a whispered offer for his stolen game, his haste betraying him as Penrose's had. The historians slip about the rune, his hasty trip to London, the replica amulet, all were missteps in a dance he thought he controlled. The village would talk of the theft for weeks, she knew, embellishing her role until it became a legend. Already, Mrs. Clement had hinted at a tale of Miss Marple's cleverness at the vicarage tea, and the postmistress had winked knowingly when handing over her letters. Miss Marple smiled, untroubled by the attention. Fame, like suspicion, was fleeting, and she preferred the quiet of her parlour to the spotlight of village gossip. She thought of a long-ago mystery, a missing silver spoon, solved by listening to a maid's nervous chatter, and knew her strength lay in seeing what others overlooked. The fire crackled, and she set her knitting aside, her eyes resting on the roses, their petals soft against the lamplight. The amulet's return had closed one chapter, but St. Mary Mead, with its secrets and stories, would surely offer another. Human nature, she mused, was as old as the runes themselves, its patterns of greed, fear, and hope etched as deeply as any artifact. The oldest mystery, she said softly, her voice blending with the fire's whisper, is the heart, and it never grows dull. She rose to make tea, her movements slow but sure, the kettle's hum a familiar comfort. As she waited, her thoughts turned to the museum's shadows, the flicker that hid a theft, and the truth that emerged in the light. Dr. Penrose, with his hollowed book and desperate debts, was no different from the villagers she had known, each stumbling over their own desires. The kettle whistled, and Miss Marple poured her tea, the steam curling like a question mark. The village slept, unaware of the quiet genius in their midst, but she was content, her needles ready for the next puzzle life might bring.